So while I'm waiting for dinner here, just got my water on the stove, waiting for that to boil. I thought what I would do is load some bullets. And so, you know, I don't know if that may seem as come as a surprise to you guys, but it is possible out here in the bush. And I've done it a few times. It's kind of more of a novelty thing. I don't know entirely how practical it is. But nonetheless, I've never done a YouTube video on hand loading out in the bush, and I say that I've done lots of hand loading videos, but not out here. So what I'm going to use is the brass that I fired in the 30-06 earlier today. Brought some large rifle primers. I brought this guy, which is kind of the star of the show. This is the Lee rifle loader, Lee loader, and this is the hand loader that makes all this possible. I brought some Hodgdon 4350 powder, which I've labeled in a separate baggie, double bagged that, and I brought some Hornady interlock bullets. So those are all the pieces that we need to put this together. For you guys that are watching the main video that's got all of the adventure stuff in it, I'm going to sign this part off here. But if you want to watch this and figure out how I'm going to do this, I'm going to post this video separately on the channel, so watch for that. So to everybody else that's still here, don't know if you've seen one of these before. When I first started loading years ago, this is one of the things I got started with. So if you're totally new to bullet loading, and if you just want to do a few for hunting every year, then this is a great place to get started. You don't necessarily need to do it out in a tarp shelter in the middle of the mountains. Obviously you can do this in your basement or garage. So like I said, fairly easy to do with this thing right here. This is Lee loader. So I'm going to try and hopefully blast along pretty quick. I'm just going to give you an overview first. Those are the pieces that are in there. We have the bullet seater, we have a powder measure, and a couple of different stands to put this all together. We have a pin that's going to punch the old primer out of the brass. Also included are full instructions on how to do this thing, and I haven't read them for quite a while, so I'm just going to wing this. So if I get it wrong, blame me, not the instructions. And the other thing that you get is a powder chart. Very simple recipes on here, from everything, including a 100 grain bullet right up to a 250 grain bullet for a 30-06. Obviously, the most common options are going to be 150 through 180, maybe a 200. But so for each of those bullet weights, they're going to give you a couple of different powder options. The options that they're giving you are all based around the powder measure that comes included with the kit. So this particular measure is 3.7 cc's, and so the loads that are on this chart, while not perfectly tuned, if you use this powder measure and the powder that they suggest in that quantity for that weight of bullet, it's going to work out for you. And again, it may not be finely tuned or completely optimal for that weight of bullet, but in a pinch, it's going to work just fine. So I brought out, I kind of pre-selected some powder and some bullets that I know are going to work with that measure that show up on this chart here. So that's the loader, the bullets, the powder, the brass. This is brass that I fired in this gun earlier today. One thing to mention, you need to use, because essentially what you're doing is more or less neck sizing on this little bit of a kit here, because you haven't got a full-length press. I got to go back and read it. I can't remember for sure, but one thing I know for sure is that you need to size brass that's been fired in your gun. So if you got 2 or 3 guns that all shoot 30-06, you got to separate your brass. But out here, I got one gun, fired this here today. It was new brass when I started, so it's going to be fine to use in this Lee loader. So last piece of the puzzle is primers. I more or less brought a full box out with me, and those are for large rifle, for use in a 30-06. Before anybody gives me grief, I know you should never store powder in a Ziploc baggie, but for this purpose I didn't want to bring the whole pound out here, so you don't need to send me a comment on that. The other thing, right up front, I did actually remember to bring some safety glasses, so always wear safety glasses when you're reloading, period, but particularly with this kit, because we're going to do a little bit of banging. When I say banging, you need to have a mallet that's got kind of a Teflon or plastic side to it, because you're literally going to be banging the primers in and out to this brass. So one thing they suggest is you can use a chunk of wood out here and beat on the top of your brass with that. I've never tried it. I'm sure it's possible, but just for ease, convenience, speed, I brought the mallet with me. So that's what I'm going to use. So I'm going to go step by step with this, and I'm as much as possible I'm going to follow the instructions that came with the unit, just so I don't confuse anybody. So first thing we're going to do is take the depriming base, and that's this guy right here. You know what, lighting is really going to suck in here, but anyway, there we go, depriming base. We're going to take a piece of brass and put it in the base. We're going to knock out the old primer. Got a depriming rod. That's this guy here with a little bit of a pin on it. And we're just going to insert that. And it actually is the same size. It's 0.308 diameter. There are different kits. I should just mention that. This is a 30-06 kit. But there are a whole bunch of different kits. So you got to be specific to your caliber, obviously. So going to take a depriming rod. And I put it in so that the little pin end is down, and I'm just gonna knock out the old primer. As I mentioned, there's a little bit of banging happening here, so if you look down underneath, the primer is now knocked out of that brass, and there it is. So deprimed, step 1. Okay, so step 2, we're going to size this brass, and that's the piece that you want to use here. You're going to use this for a couple of different operations. That brass is only going to fit in one way. Sorry about the lighting here, guys. I might have to do this again at home, but anyway. So put the brass in that one end, goes almost all the way in. What you want to do is now bang this brass in so that it's flush with the end of this tool. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that, move some of this other stuff out of the way. I'm going to take probably the plastic end of my hammer, and just bang that in so that it's flush, hoping you can see that. So in this next step, what we're going to do is take this device here that looks like kind of a peace pipe or something, that's called the primer locating ring, and we're going to take a new primer and insert it into that little bit of a cavity in the center there. Normally I'd want to be a little bit more careful about how I handle a primer, so I'm not getting my finger oil all over it, but in any case, this is what we're going to do. So got my primer in there. I'm going to take the sizing tool, and I've got my brass still in there, and I'm going to center this on top of the primer locator. I'm going to take my priming rod. That's the second rod that's in the kit there. And it doesn't really matter which way you use this. I think they're more or less the same on both ends, but one end kind of has a little bit of a knurling. We'll hang on to that. We're going to drop that down the center of our sizing tool. So this is the point here. You want to make sure you haven't got your face directly over top of this. You got your safety glasses on. And we're just going to take our mallet here and we're going to tap on the end of that primer primer setting device, I guess. So let's just, there you go. And you know, initially you could feel it was just a little bit higher, and just a few taps, and then I could feel that primer seating. So that being said, that primer is seated into the base of that. So now that that case is free, we're actually going to put it in there. We're not going to drive it home. We're just going to leave it kind of loose. We're going to add our powder to the top. I'm going to balance that back on that decapping base. I'm going to add some powder using our powder measure. And maybe it should have been a little more prepared here, but that's okay. So I got my Hodgdon H4350, and as I mentioned, that load for the size of bullet that I'm going to use is actually on the chart. I'm going to use the powder measure that came with this, and what you want to do is not so much scoop and compress that powder. This is based on a very loosely filled powder measure. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my powder measure in that way and just basically gently submerge it in the powder and fill up the measure from the top without compressing the powder. One thing that they suggest here, it should be a level measure. So if you got a business card or some other piece of card, I'm going to use the card that came with the kit, and I'm just going to level that measure off carefully. There we go, perfectly level. Haven't spilled any powder. Going to pour that into the top of the sizing tube. There we go. Just going to close my powder up again and set that aside. Next thing we're going to do here is add a bullet. And as I mentioned, I kind of pre-selected some bullets. This is a Hornady 180 grain, what is it, Interbond, I think, bonded bullet. And the nice thing about this, the Interbond and the SST, they have cantilures on them. And when I was at home, obviously I don't have any caliber out here, so what about bullet seating depth? What I did is I took one of these bullets and I kind of measured it so that if I insert it right up to the cantilure, and what I'm talking about cantilure is that little bit of an indentation right there. If I insert that bullet up to the cantilure, that's going to basically be the optimal depth for this bullet with that amount of powder. So I've already got a built-in measuring device. So what we're going to do, take that bullet, just drop it in the top, obviously base first. And what we're going to do is use this tool to drive that home. So now that I've got my bullet dropped in there, what we need to do is seat that bullet. So I've kind of determined that the bullet is all the way in there, right up to the brass, and just kind of working with, you know, what I'm kind of guessing is going to be a good seating depth. I can adjust the top of this. It's on a threaded base there. So once I feel that the bullet is on top of the brass, I can thread this top section in or out to set my seating depth. So I'm going to start with about 1/4 of an inch, which is, you know, roughly where I think that bullet's going to be seated. I'm going to tap that bullet home to that 1/4 inch depth. Once again, still wearing my safety glasses. I'm going to pull that bullet out of there. And actually I was fairly close. That bullet is almost seated right up to the cannelure. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn that threaded portion in a couple more turns. Give that another little bit of a hammer. A couple more turns. Just checking the depth there. Even another turn. And that bullet there is now seated right up to the cannelure. So we've got brass that's been sized, we've got a new primer, we've got powder added, we got a seated bullet. This cartridge, 30-06, is ready to fire. So that's the first one. I kind of walked you through it. You know, once you get into a little bit of a groove, it comes easier. The bullet seating depth is already set based on this first one, and everything after that is just a matter of walking through the same steps. So, you know, that's basically this thing in a nutshell. And I was working. I think I paused the camera in between each one. I was working right off the written instructions here. So very easy to do. If you've never loaded, you know, bullets before, you know, go out and buy one of these. Watch a YouTube video. Try and do a better one at home where there's a little bit more light. But very easy to do, and that's it. Now I can tell you, based on personal experience, this bullet is going to be very accurate with the, you know, every other one that you load by this process. Basically neck sized only. You know, arguably better than a full length size. It's been fired into your gun and neck sized. There's no you know, extra crimp or anything on here. Perfect neck tension. Each one repeatable, one after the next. The only variable is your powder. So just be careful and be consistent with your powder measures. So there you go. That's it in a nutshell. Loading 30-06 by the the light of a flashlight, the headlamp overhead, waiting for my water to boil on the wood stove. So this video is probably a little bit longer, you know, for you guys that are interested in that. I hope you find it useful. Again, I'm going to try and do another one. If you want one that's a little bit clearer, just post a comment down below, and I'll get you one at home that's got way better lighting. Today, I just wanted to give you the idea of what could be done out sitting beside a campfire.